Sige. Okay na? Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome again to another live episode of tax training. And tuloy-tuloy lang po tayo. Our discussion will still focus on transfer pricing. No? And I would like to say thank you to our subscribers. No? Umabot na tayo ng 4,890. And thank you very much for your support. We promise to give you more information on tax update. Kung mapapansin ninyo yung mga ginagawa nating video ngayon, not only on the local tax cases, ni-explain din po natin yung mga decisions ng court, no? Kung paano nagkaroon ng mga ganong decision so that we can learn from those cases. No? Yun po yung purpose natin. Yung kagaya yung mga lessons learned from those cases na para sa atin in our end maiwasan po natin. Because our purpose here is for you to have a better tax compliance. Okay. So, shout out tayo. Sino yung naman nandyan?
Ma'am, si Sir Josepino,
always.
Si Mary Grace, sila lagi yung...
First owner yan natin sila eh.
Sabay sila.
Okay. So, shout out po Mary Grace at saka Sir Raylin. No? Ito yung mga masisipag natin na YouTuber. Okay. So, yung last po natin, we still have sa transfer pricing natin nung nakaraan, no? Although ngayon, sabi nga natin, even if we are discussing about transfer pricing, we will still entertain questions na kahit sa ibang topic po, no? Hindi related sa transfer pricing. And also, mamaya magta-tax update po tayo. Ito yung Revenue Regulations number 21-2020. Ito po yung Voluntary Assessment and Payment Program na available na po ngayon for taxable year 2018. No? Mamaya po natin yan i-discuss. Actually, itong ating discussion po sa transfer pricing ngayon, hindi natin ito matatapos. Kasi mahaba po, pa po itong tax audit na to. No? Mahaba ito kasi ito yung pinaka mahirap na trabaho sa transfer pricing, yung mag-audit na. No? Kasi dito mo na i-deliver kung ano ba talaga yung resulta ng in-apply mo yung arm's length principle. Okay? So, continuous lang po tayo. Our topic today is about transfer pricing. Dito na tayo sa separate and combined transaction approach when it comes to profit allocation. No? Ga-allocate na tayo ng profit. Kasi sabi nga natin, transfer pricing, there is always a related party. Kasi kung walang related party, wala pong transfer pricing. So, ano ang pinag-uusapan dito? The profit allocation. Why? Kasi related parties sila. Sometimes hindi mo makita dito sa isang transaction. Wala sa kanya yung profit. Nasaan? Doon sa talagang tumatanggap ng pera. But, since may participation itong isang member ng grupo, so dapat meron din po siyang share doon sa profit. No? So, separate and combined transactions approach. To obtain the most precise approximation of the arm's length prices on profit allocation, the arm's length principle should ideally be applied to a transaction by transaction basis. No? So, depending on the circumstances of the case, actually, na-discuss na natin ito ng pahapyaw last Tuesday, no? So, depending on the circumstances of the case, kaya nga sabi ng OECD, every transfer pricing case is a unique case. Kaya hindi mo pwedeng gawin na i-apply mo yung mga na-apply na sa ibang kaso sa isang kaso. No? It might be na magkapareho sila ng decision, pero you really have to consider on a case-to-case basis. No? Because each transfer pricing case is unique. So depending on the circumstances of the case, transfer pricing may sometimes need to be dealt with at the level of a product or business unit rather than at the level of its particular transaction. So ano yung level ng product or business unit rather than level of its particular transaction? Hindi mo pwedeng i-apply yung profit allocation doon sa particular transaction. Kasi bakit? Kung particular transaction yung titingnan mo, wala talagang profit yung isa kasi nandoon sa isa yung profit. Kaya ang titingnan mo dyan sa level ng product. Paano ba nabuo yung product? So, sino nag-participate? No? Sino nag-contribute para mabuo yung product? So, in establishing transfer prices, taxpayers should set prices separately for its transaction they enter into with a related or associated person. Where transactions are so closely linked for continuous that they cannot be evaluated adequately on a separate basis, determination of transfer price based on bundled transactions may be considered. Ano tong bundled transaction as a whole, no? Hindi mo pa siya pwedeng ihiwalay. No? This is provided if it can be demonstrated that it is the normal industry practice to set one price for a combination of transaction. No? For instance, goods and the associated intangible property, or where it may not be reasonable to expect to find quality data available to set the price for separate transactions. No? Kasi mahirap, no? Complicated yung situation. Lack of reliable data, ito pa, isa pa. No? Lack of reliable data on comparable transactions may be due to the complicity of the dealing or the relationships between the parties. No? Therefore, the total amount may be on an aggregate basis. Aggregate basis mo siya kasi wala talagang comparable. No? Especially, halimbawa, yung isang software, no? Unique siya na isa lang yung may-ari. Tapos yung licensing niya with its subsidiary, wala kang makitang comparable kasi sila lang yung meron. So it is generally accepted to group intangible associated with a product or service provided if comparables independent transactions also have these various transactions which cannot be disaggregated and are bundled into a package deal with all the associated costs being included in the price of the product. No? Kasi minsan yung production by stages, minsan kagaya halimbawa ng printer at saka ink. No? So hindi mo naman pwedeng ihiwalay yung printer sa ink kasi hindi naman gagana yung printer, walang ink. No? So bundled yung product. Okay. Example, aggregation of transaction involving tangible and intangible products that are highly integrated. No? So, a company that licenses a manufacturing know-how and supplies vital components that are highly integrated to a related associated party may find it more reasonable to assess the arm's length prices for these two activities as an item instead of separately, no? So, siya na yung nagsusupply ng intangible, siya pa din yung nagsusupply ng materials sa manufacturing. Anong magandang example dito? Halimbawa, soft drink company, no? Sa kanya yung formula ng soft drinks and at the same time, siya pa yung nagsusupply ng mga raw materials para dun sa soft drinks, no? Yung mga ingredients para sa soft drinks. Yung parent company nagsusupply sa subsidiary. Okay. So, anong tawag doon? Aggregation of transactions. Kasama na yung tangible and intangible products. Nandoon na integrated. Kasi hindi mo pwedeng tanggalin yung formula doon sa raw materials or sa supplies. Kasi magkasama yun. Bakit? Kasi yung formula, yun yung ginagamit para doon sa pagbuo ng product. No? Diba? Sa taste niya, sa paano siya gawin. And then yung raw materials, yun yung mga sangkap, paano mo gagawin yung product. So, hindi mo sila pwedeng paghiwalay. Yun yung example na tangible and intangible products. Highly integrated. Nag-integrate sila. Okay, so another example, we have aggregation of transactions where one product complements the other. No? Aggregation of transactions may also be appropriate in situations where a taxpayer is required to carry an unprofitable product or line of products which are auxiliary to the profitable items and where there is sufficient profit available to provide an adequate return from the complete product range to reward the FAR. Ano po yung FAR? Functions, assets, and risk of the company. Also, common types of bundled products that fall under this category include printers with cartridges and razors with blade. So, yung products na talagang magkasama. Isa pa to sa yung sinasabi natin kanina na integrated, no? Integrated na product. Okay. Disaggregation of transactions where the nature of transaction is substantially different, no? So dito magkaiba naman yung transaction. Okay. Example, Company LAC was established in the Philippines to handle distribution, sales, after-sales services, repair and maintenance services of the TMD group vehicles consisting of trucks, buses, and coaches, which are 100% imported from its parent company in the US. So, nag-i-import sila ng sasakyan sa United States, no? Anong trabaho dito sa Pilipinas ng subsidiary? Handle distribution, siya yung nagdi-distribute, siya yung nagsisales, marketing. And then, after-sales services. Ano itong after-sales services? Ito yung mga repairs, no? Kung halimbawa o kaya may mga maintenance na dapat dun sa mga trucks. So sila yung nagpo-provide ng services dito. So Company LAC is also the regional hub, no, for TMD in Southeast Asia, covering markets such as Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia. This regional office also houses the regional training center where mechanics, technicians, driver, trainers, and managers from Asia-Pacific region are trained to provide TMD's group customers in the region. Siyempre, pagka ganyan yung negosyo mo, ang mga personnel mo dyan dapat marunong, so they are properly trained, no? Ordinarily, in this situation, the various kinds of activities should not be aggregated. And Company LAC is required to prepare segmented accounts as follows, no? So in order to enable the evaluation of the arm's length nature of the control transaction on a transactional basis. So ano yung i-segment mo na account? Sales and distribution, repairs and maintenance services, and then the regional services. Hindi mo siya pwedeng pagsama-samahin. Pwede mo siya i-consolidate, but you must be able to make a separate, no, na account sa sales and distribution, sa repairs and maintenance services, sa regional services. So ito po yung sinasabi natin na segmented accounts, no? Ibig sabihin ng segmented accounts, nakahiwalay siya, no? Meron siyang sariling breakdown. Okay. So, this is another topic, no? Re-characterization. Ano po ang ibig sabihin ng re-characterization? This is the examination of a control transaction. Ordinarily should be based on the transaction actually undertaken by the taxpayer insofar as they are consistent with the methods described in the guidelines. Ano ibig sabihin ng re-characterization? Actually, sa mga transfer pricing cases, if we try to examine, no, or read this transfer pricing cases, meron ng mga cases dyan na re-characterization. Ano yung ibig sabihin ng re-characterization? Sa kontrata between related parties or sa term na ginamit nila on the nature of the transactions, ginamit nilang list. Pero, pag tiningnan mo, it is really sale, no? So, anong gagawin ngayon ng examiner or ng court? I-recharacterize yung transaction. Ibig sabihin, ang classification nila, iibahin ngayon, no? Para makita mo talaga kung ano yung true transaction. No? Paano mo i-recharacterize? Substance over form, not form over substance. Kasi yung form niya, halimbawa, yung form niya is lease, no? Nagre-renta lang. Pero yung totoo, sale na pala, no? So, ano yung substance? Sale, pero yung form, lease, no? So, recharacterization of the transaction. When reviewing an agreement between related associated parties, consideration is not only on the terms of the agreement, but also the actual conduct of the parties. Ito yung mga manifestations, no, ng real transactions. They are being manifested on the actual dealings or conduct of the parties. So, ano ba yan talaga ang totoong nangyayari dito? No? Halimbawa na lang, airline companies, no? yung kanilang airlines pinapangalan sa isang company. Pero yung totoo na may-ari, sila pa rin, and at the same time sa kanila yung operation. Parang hinati-hati lang nila at iniba-iba lang yung company, pero it pertains to the same operation, no? Na airlines. May question na?
Wala pa.
Okay. Shout out.
Wala pa rin ma'am nag-chat pero may viewers naman tayo ma'am.
Walang nagchat-chat.
Ma'am, si Sir Jomar de la Paz ma'am,
Okay.
chat lang po. Good evening daw po ma'am.
So, shout out po Sir Jomar de la Paz. Okay. So, re-characterization po yung ating diniscuss, no? So, therefore, in determining an arm's length price, the revenue officer may disregard, re-characterize a controlled transaction under the following circumstances. So, ito po, ang pinag-usapan natin ngayon dito, ito yun na yung audit. Ito na kung ano yung gagawin ng examiner, no? So, ano gagawin ng examiner kung makita niya na yung transaction, hindi talaga yan ang totoong transaction, no? So, magre-characterize siya. Ito na yung gagawin niya. Letter A, where the economic substance of a transaction differ from its form, no? So, economic substance, ano ba economic substance na nagnegosyo ka? Ano yung ultimate mo na reason bakit ka nagnegosyo? For profit. Eh, bakit 10 taon net loss ka na, nagnegosyo ka pa rin, no? So, anong ibig sabihin yan? Yung economic substance na ginagawa mo differs from its form, no? So, ibig sabihin, hindi ka talaga nagnenegosyo. No? You are doing service to your parent company. Where the form and substance of what transactions are the same, no? So, the form and the substance are the same. The arrangements made in relation to the transaction when viewed in their totality differ from those which would have been adopted by independent. Ito na yung the substance and the form is the same pero hindi naman arm's length. Why? Because it would have been adopted by different siya kung i-apply mo sa independent party, no? Behaving in commercially rational manner, and this actual structure practically impedes the BAR from determining an appropriate transfer prices, no? So, ano nga siya, same substance, same form, pero hindi naman arm's length. Okay. So, the need to recharacterize a transaction is based on the rationale that the character of the transaction is derived from the relationship between the parties and is not determined by normal condition. No? So, hindi normal. Ibig sabihin, asan ba ang normal? Ang normal yung sa independent transactions wherein the market is determined by the economic conditions. No? Pero pagka gawa-gawa na lang, hindi na yan normal. Artificial na yan. No? So, the control transaction may have been structured by the taxpayer to avoid or minimize tax. Ito na yung sabi natin na artificial price management. And the purpose is to avoid payment of taxes. No? So, this is supported by the fact that related associated parties are able to enter into a greater variety of contracts. Siyempre, kasi isa lang sila eh. So, kahit anong contract, pwede nilang pasukin kasi same person lang naman sila. No? So, isa lang may utak. Variety of contracts and agreements compared to independent persons because the normal conflict of interest which exists between independent parties is often absent. No? Kasi sa related parties, between them, kahit anong klaseng contract yung gagawin nila, wala mawawala sa kanila eh. Kung panalo yung isang company, it still belongs to them. Lugi yung isang company, it still belongs to them. Kaya walang effect no sa group. Letter B, associated persons often conclude arrangements of a specific nature that are not or very rarely encountered between independent persons. And contracts under a controlled transaction are quite easily altered, no? Suspended, extended, or terminated according to the overall strategies of the multinational group as a whole, and such alteration may even be made retroactively. Example, an investment in a related associated company in the form of interest-bearing debt would not be expected to be structured in the same way had it been conducted at arm's length, given the economic circumstances of the borrowing company. No, in this case, it might be appropriate for a tax administration to characterize the investment in accordance with its economic substance, where the loan may be treated as subscription or of capital. Ang dami po talaga. Kaya nung 2020, February, naglabas na po yung OECD ng transfer pricing guidelines on financial transactions. Kasi dito sa example 9 na to, napakarami po ito. Kumbaga sa music, gas-gas na rin to when it comes to financial dealings, no, between companies. Ito ang palaging ginagawa, no? Subscription siya, capital siya, ini-infuse nila yung capital, pero pinapalabas nila na liability. No, so instead na yung investment papasok sa equity, bibili ng shares of stocks, hindi nila linalagay doon. Ano linalagay nila? Sa liability, loan ng company. So, anong mangyayari doon? Wala siyang lugi. Kasi malugi man o hindi malugi yung company, hindi mawawala yung liability. No? Unlike na pag shares of stock siya, pag nalugi ang company, bababa yung retained earnings, bababa din yung capital mo. No? Nawawala. Pero sa liability, hindi siya nawawala. Next example. A sale under a long-term contract for a lump sum payment gives unlimited entitlement to the intellectual property rights arising as a result of future research for the term of the contract. While it may be proper to respect the transaction as a transfer of commercial property, it would nevertheless be appropriate for a tax administration to conform the terms of that transfer in its entirety to that which might reasonably have been expected between independent persons. Okay? So, ito yung mga long-term contract ng lump sum payment. No? Okay. So, in the case described above, it might be appropriate for the tax administration, for example, to adjust the conditions of the agreement in a commercially rational manner as a continuing research agreement. Kasi depende na yan eh. Minsan ang transfer pricing issues nasa mga provisions ng contract, no? Minsan nasa amount, no? Ang dami kong nakita diyan na mga agreement between related parties, and then pag tiningnan mo, hindi mo malaman yung mga provisions, ang dami pang supplemental agreements, no? Reporting of audit on transfer pricing, no? So the report should include the following. Ito nasa reporting na po tayo, no? Kasi gagawa na ng report yung examiner, no? So reporting of audit on transfer pricing. The report should include the following. Executive summary. Ano yung executive summary? Parang thesis, no? Nandoon na yung summary ng report, no? Kung ano siya, parang overview, yung comprehensive na explanations about the report. And then the factual background and functional analysis of the taxpayer transactions at issue. No? Ano yung factual background, functional analysis of the taxpayer transaction. So, nandun na yung explanations kung ano yung mga issues. No? Mahirap ba maghanap ng issues sa transfer pricing? Mabilis lang po, dali lang. No? Summary of taxpayers' proposed economic analysis for the transaction at issue. Critique of taxpayers' methodology and analysis for the transaction at issue. Revenue officers' determination of the arm's length price based upon economic analysis. No? So dito mayroon ng computation ang examiner, no? Kung arm's length price pa as to the pricing. Summary and conclusion. No? So yan po yung report ng examiner. The revenue officer shall, with the taxpayer to discuss the findings, the audit findings on all issues prior to finalizing the report. No? So, paano yung mga discussions nila? Understand the taxpayer's position. Determine whether the taxpayer agrees with the facts, no? Kasi may findings na siya eh. May report na siya, ipe-present na niya yun sa taxpayer. Determining whether the taxpayer would agree to any issue. So parang ito na yung pag-present niya ng mga issues kung mag-a-agree yung taxpayer. This is part of the due process, no? Kasi hindi naman ma-finalize yung report ng examiner without informing the taxpayer of its findings. Okay. So, doon na tayo sa transfer pricing method. 5 minutes break muna tayo ha. Kasi CCR lang ako.
Iwan mo na lang sa may ano. Slider ay sa ating... May gagawin ka pa ba? Wala naman.
Ah?
Hindi ba? Pag hindi mag-delay lang ito. Tuloy-tuloy na mag-video.
Okay, so let's now discuss about the transfer pricing audit method. Paano po ba ginagawa ng examiner yung pag-audit, no? Okay. So, audit of transfer pricing on taxpayers' transaction with the related associated parties can be conducted by performing test of prices or profits, no? Kasi yung method is comparing, di ba? So, balikan natin kung ano talagang ginagawa sa transfer pricing. We have to compare ng halimbawa, profit, no? Kasi, compare natin yung profit na related party with the profit of the independent party. So, ano ba talaga ang dapat? Di po ba ang dapat is yung independent party ang susundin natin because that is the true transaction. No? So, audit of transfer pricing on taxpayers' transaction with the related associated parties can be conducted by performing test of prices or profits. Sa test of prices, ito yung gagamitan natin ng comparable uncontrolled price, no? Kaya nga, price yung ating kino-compare. Pagdating naman sa profits, can be gross profit or net profit. Sino yung gumagamit ng gross profit pag nag-compare? The resale price method and the cost plus method. Sino naman ang gumagamit ng net profit na method? The transactional net margin method and the profit split. No? Kasi 5 lang yung method na tinuturo sa atin, no? 5 yung sa OECD. Although dito sa transfer pricing audit, may linagay pa sila dito na any other methods, no? After making comparability analysis, test of application of the arm's length principle is performed by applying the transfer pricing methods, no? Transactions of sale or purchase of goods or services. To test sale or purchase, ito na po yung gagawin ng examiner, no? To test sale or purchases of goods or services, the revenue officers can use the transfer pricing methods that is most appropriate to the facts and conditions. No? So, description kung ano yung mga steps na i-apply. Tayin mo na to. Andarin mo na to. Isara mo rin yung pintuan dyan. So, number 1 is the comparable uncontrolled price or the CAP method. No? So, sa word pa lang, malalaman na natin kung ano yung kino-compare. No? Kasi sabi, comparable uncontrolled price method. So, anong kino-compare dito? The price. No? So, comparable uncontrolled price method. The CAP method evaluates whether the amount charged in a controlled transaction is at arm's length, no? By reference to the amount charged in a comparable uncontrolled transaction in comparable circumstances. No? Kaya nga, CAP siya, CAP, no? Price, comparable uncontrolled price method. So, any differences between the two prices may indicate that the conditions of the commercial and financial relations of the associated enterprises are not arm's length. Kasi kung same price, same product, same features, same kind of product, mas magkaiba ang price, no? So, ibig sabihin, may diferensya at hindi arm's length po yung pricing. So, the price in the uncontrolled transaction may need to be substituted for the price in the controlled transaction. So, the CAP method is applied by comparing the prices. You compare the price of goods or services in related party transactions with the prices of goods or services in independent transaction. No? So, application of the CAP method to transactions of sale or purchase of goods or services is done using the following steps. So, these are the steps. No? Okay. Letter A, perform comparability analysis. Sabi na natin, the heart of transfer pricing is the comparability analysis, no? Kasi, bakit? Ano ba ang arm's length? Di ba ang arm's length is you compare the price of goods and services, the related party transactions, and the independent transactions, no? Excuse me. Okay. So, before the comparison is done, the revenue officers must first confirm the comparability between the related party transactions and independent transactions. No? Ang dami nyo pong i-consider dito. So, kung balikan natin, yung 5 comparability factors, no? So, doon talaga nag-uumpisa yon yung 5 na comparability factors. No? So, number 1 is the characteristic of the goods and services. But, for price, ang pinaka-malaking factor that will affect the price is the characteristic ng goods or services. No? Kaya pag nag-compare tayo at price yung kinumpare natin, malaki yung effect sa difference in characteristic as to the price. Kasi pag magkaiba sila ng characteristic, definitely hindi sila pareho ng price. No? So, in performing the comparability analysis, it must be understood that minor differences in the characteristics of goods and services can have a material influence on the price of the goods and services. No? Kaya nga sabi natin, yung characteristic has a material influence. May changes talaga sa goods and services. No? Malaki ang epekto niya sa goods and services. No? Therefore, the comparability of the goods or services is an important factor that needs to be considered in the CAP method compared with the application of other TPMs. So, ang comparable uncontrolled price method, malaki ang effect ng price, no, dito sa method na to. At malaki din yung effect ng characteristics, no, kasi diyan nagbabari yung prices. FAR analysis, functions, assets, and risk, no. So, in addition to the characteristic of the goods and services, comparability of the functions performed. Functions performed. Ano bang klase ng functions niya? Warehousing ba siya? Manufacturing? Logistics? Warehousing? No? Functions performed. The assets used. Especially yung mga industry na sinasabi natin na asset-oriented. Ibig sabihin na asset-oriented, di siya nakakapag-perform ng functions niya kung walang assets, no? And then we have the risk involved between the related transactions. Ano yung mga considerations natin sa risk? Who controls the risk? Who owns the risk? And who has the capacity to assume the risk, no? So, risk involved between the related transactions and the independent transactions has also material influence on the price of goods and service. So, significant differences in function, assets, and risk will reflect a difference in the expected return. Siyempre, kaya nga may kasabihan na high risk, high reward. No? Pag mas risky, pag mas marami yung risk na inabsorb ng isang party, mas malaki yung bayad sa kanya. Kaya ka magtataka kasi sa related parties, why is it na yung risk sa kanya naka-assign, pero yung rewards o yung price na napunta sa kanya, mababa lang. So, ibig sabihin, dictated or controlled ng other parties. Okay. So, aside from the characteristics of the products and the FAR analysis, differences in contractual terms, no? So, ito yung mga 5 comparability factors na tinuro sa atin, no? Another one is the contractual terms, business strategy, economic conditions, important comparability factors. Lahat yan, compare mo talaga dyan. Kasi pag nagkaiba yung economic conditions, hindi mo na sila pwedeng i-compare. Pag nagkaiba ng business strategies, hindi mo na pwedeng i-compare, no? Hindi ka na pwedeng mag-compare. And then you have to consider all those things when applying the CAP method, no? So, after performing comparability analysis, comparison of the prices of goods or services and related party transactions and the prices of goods or services in independent transactions can be done. So, pwede na. Pwede ka nang mag-compare, no? There are 2 ways to compare prices of goods or services, which are direct and indirect comparison. So, pwedeng direct comparison or indirect comparison. Direct comparison is done if there are no difference in conditions between the related party transactions and the independent transactions. So, ibig sabihin, same talaga sila, no? That materially influence the prices of the goods and services. So, adjustment can be made directly for any difference in the prices of the goods and services. Maganda kasi itong audit na to, may mga computation talaga dito mamaya na papakita, no? Indirect comparison is done if there are differences in conditions between the related party transactions and the independent transactions that materially influence the price of the goods and services, and reasonably accurate adjustment can be made to eliminate this material influence. No? Okay. So, wala pang question? Okay. So, increase comparability. No? So, increasing comparability is done when there are differences in conditions between related party transactions and independent transactions that materially influence the prices of the goods and services. So the purpose of increasing comparability is to eliminate that material influence. No? So, ang purpose talaga ng mag-compare tayo is to make them equal, to make the two transactions similar. Ano yung two transactions na yun? The related party transactions and the independent transactions. No? So, increasing comparability in the CAP method is done by making reasonably accurate adjustment for the differences in conditions between the related party transactions and the independent transactions. Okay. Kasi pagka makita mo talaga na may difference, mag-adjust ka, no? Kung kaya ng data mo, ng information mo, mag-adjust ka to make them similar, no? Okay. Example, taxpayer TMD, an MNE, ibig sabihin multinational enterprises. Ibig sabihin ng multinational enterprises, marami siyang mga branches worldwide, no? Sells 60% of its product to an associated company, WSR, at a price of 100 per unit. 100 per unit yung binibenta niya na product. At the same time, the remaining 40% is sold to an independent enterprise, ASG, at 150 per unit. So, binibenta niya sa related party 100 per unit lang, pero 60%. Yung sa independent naman, 150, pero 40%. So, okay. No. So, ano yung difference doon sa unang example natin, example 11. 60% of its product to an associated company. Why? So, mas mura talaga pag marami. Diba? Kasi may volume discount, may mas marami ang bibilhin mo, mas mura ang bibigay sa'yo. And sa isa naman, sa independent enterprise, binibenta ng 150 per unit, pero 40%. So, ibig sabihin, mas kakaunti. No? Doon sa 60%, mas marami yung nabibili niya. Kaya, nakukuha niya ng mura lang. Okay. Taxpayer TMD and MNE sales 60%. Bakit? Same lang din to. Okay. So, TMD control transaction, no? So, the transfer price is 100. Yun yung pagbenta niya kay WSR, which is the related party. Doon naman sa independent party kay ASG, 150 niya binenta, no? So, ito yung arm's length. Kasi independent eh. So, sino ba yung may totoong presyo? Diba yung si independent, no? So, 150 siya. Okay, compare. The products sold to WSR and ASG are the same, and the transaction between TMD and ASG may be considered as a comparable and controlled transaction, no? Functions, assets, and risks of WSR and ASG must first be carried out to determine any differences. So, tingnan muna natin kung ano ba yung difference nila, no? Kung may mga differences, then adjustment must be made to account for these differences, no? Adjustment must also be made to account for product quantity discounts. Ito yung sinasabi ko na discount kasi 60% yung binibili nung isa, yung sa isa 40% lang. Assuming there are no material differences that require adjustment to be made, then the cap may be applied using the unit price of 150 as a comparable arm's length price. So, ano mangyayari ngayon? Kasi 150 yung arm's length price, ibinenta niya kay related party niya ng 100 lang. So, assist pa siya dun sa 50. Okay. So, example. Controlled transaction TMD, binenta niya kay WSR ng 100. Sa independent naman transaction, 150 ang bintahan. No? So, ang totoong bintahan is 150. No? So, manufacturer TMD export its product to associate company WSR. No? Manufacturer FEL exports the same product in similar quantities. So, hindi mo na masabi na kanina 60-40, ngayon similar quantities. No? And other similar terms to company LAC, an independent party operating in similar markets as WSR. No? So, the uncontrolled sales price is a delivered price whereby the controlled sales are made FOB price. Kanina, ang adjustment doon yung volume discount, no? Product discount. Dito naman, shipment, yung delivery. Ano naman? FOB, freight on board, no? Ang isa, delivered price. Wala nang babayaran na freight. Yung isa may babayaran pa. No? Okay. So, these differences in terms of transportation and duties have an effect on price, no? Kaya nga may effect siya sa price. Kasi, yung isa may delivered na, itong isa naman, may babayaran pa siya na transportation. So, therefore, adjustment should be made on the uncontrolled transaction to eliminate the differences. Ano yung eliminate mo? Yung delivery price. No? So, selling price is 150, less adjustment for freight na 10, adjustment for duties, 5, so total adjustment is 15. So, arm's length price is 135. Binenta niya na 100 lang. So, may adjustment pa ulit na 35. Yun yung deficiency ni in related party. Okay. Okay, walang question?
Nakikinig po sila sa discussion niyo, ma'am.
Okay. So, number 2, we have 5 transfer pricing methods, no? So, yung number 1, yun yung comparable uncontrolled price method. Now, we go to number 2, which is the resale price method or the RPM. No? So, RPM is applied where a product that has been purchased from a related party is resold to an independent party. No? Ano yung resold? Binenta ulit. Kaya nga resale price. No? So, it seeks to value the functions performed by the reseller of the product. So, anong hinahanap dito? Ano ba yung ginawa ng reseller doon sa produkto na binili niya? No? Para ma-determine mo kung magkano talaga yung dapat na price. No? So, the resale price method evaluates whether the amount charged in a controlled transaction is at arm's length by reference to the gross profit margin realized in comparable uncontrolled transaction. So, kanina ang kinompare natin na price. Ngayon, ang i-compare natin dito, gross profit margin. Ano yung gross profit margin? Sales less cost of sales or direct cost kung services equals the gross profit. So, yung gross profit na yan ay i-compare natin between related parties and the independent parties. Yun ang i-compare. Okay. The usefulness of the method largely depends on how much added value or alteration the reseller has done on the product before it is resold, or the time lapse between purchase and onward sale. No? So, RPM is most appropriate in a situation where the reseller adds relatively little value to the properties. Ibig sabihin ng little value, bawa binili mo lang yung goods and then binenta mo. Hindi mo na pinrocess ulit, hindi mo na in-improve, hindi mo na nilagyan ng kung ano-ano, binenta mo siya ulit. So, the resale price method is transfer pricing method that determines the purchase price of goods from related parties by deducting the gross profit of comparable independent parties from the resale price of the goods to the independent parties. No? So, yun yung kinukumpare naman dito ngayon, the related party and the independent parties. No? So, application of the resale price method in transaction of purchase of goods is done through the following steps. No? Letter A, ito po yung gagawin ng examiner. Letter A, perform comparability analysis. Kung mapapansin po ninyo, sa lahat ng methods, nandyan ang comparability analysis. No? So, balikan na naman doon sa 5 comparability factors and then apply it when you compare. No? So, perform comparability analysis. No? So, paano mo siya i-compare? No? So, in applying the resale price method, attention must be given to the comparability factors between the related party transactions and the independent transactions. Number 1, characteristics of goods, no? So, characteristic of goods, kasi resale ito eh, nagbili tayo, no? And then, ibenta natin ulit, no? So, in applying the resale price method, difference in the characteristic of goods generally do not have a material influence on the gross margin. So, since sabi nga natin, the number 1 factor, comparability factor is characteristic. Kanina, doon sa comparable uncontrolled price method, material yung characteristic ng goods. Kasi pagka iba yung characteristic ng goods, ibang-iiba ng price. Dito sa resale price method, hindi na material yung characteristic of goods, no? Kasi kahit magkaiba sila ng characteristics, ang tinitingnan na dito is the gross profit, hindi na yung price, no? Kaya hindi material yung characteristic ng goods. Example, a company that distributes toasters and company that distributes blenders have comparable functions, assets, and risks. No? Comparable, ibig sabihin, similar. So, these two distributor companies should have comparable levels of gross margin. Ibig sabihin, hindi magkakalayo yung gross margin nila for their sales of toasters and blenders. No? So, in applying the resale price method, although differences in the goods can be tolerated, the comparability of the characteristics of goods must still be considered. No? So, extreme difference in the characteristic of goods tend to indicate the existence of differences in FAR which have a material influence on the gross margin. No? So, ano yung differences? Yung FAR na functions, assets, and risks. Kasi ito yung pangalawa na comparability factors. Eh, no? Ano ba yung 5 comparability factors? Characteristics. So, sabi natin, ang characteristics, material siya sa price pa nag-compare ka ng price. Sa resale price naman, ano material dito? The functions. No? Functions, assets, and risks. Ano ba yung 5 comparability factors natin? Number 1, the characteristics and nature of goods and services, whether tangible or intangible. And then number 2, we have the functions, assets, and risks. Number 3, we have the economic conditions. Number 4, we have business strategies. And then we have the contractual terms. No? So yun yung 5 na yan, dapat natin i-compare. So dito, ang characteristics sa resale price hindi masyado, pero material yung difference pagdating na sa functions, assets, and risks, no? That's a material influence on the gross margin. Okay, so the FAR analysis in the resale price method, comparability of the FAR between the related party transactions and the independent transactions receives a greater emphasis in the that the comparability of the characteristic of goods, no? So, malaki talaga ang effect ng functions, assets, and risks sa pag nag-compare ka using the resale price method. Related party transactions and independent transactions can be considered non-comparable when there are significant differences in FAR. So, kung hindi sila pareho ng functions, hindi sila pareho ng assets, no? And also the treatment ng risk, pwedeng hindi sila comparable. In that case, pagka hindi comparable, i-disregard mo yun, i-reject mo, no? Pag hindi sila comparable. So, generally, significant differences in FAR reflect differences in the expected return. Consistency of accounting standards. Another important matter in applying the resale price method is consistency of the accounting standards between the related party transactions and the independent transactions. No? Okay. Accounting standards. Ano ba yung accounting standards natin? No? Ito yung provided sa atin ng IFRS, no? Dapat consistent yung treatment natin kung ano yung accounting standards na in-adapt natin. We have full IFRS, we have accounting standards for SMEs, small medium entities, and also for small entities. So, Accounting standards between related party transactions and the independent transactions. Ano palang rule natin sa accounting standards pagka related parties, no? There are mandatory adoption ng accounting standard when it comes to full IFRS. Ito yung full IFRS, ito yung mga companies na with secondary license, na sa public offering, no? Halimbawa, yung related parties mo is such that nag-IPO siya, no? Initial public offering, traded yung stocks niya. And then, mandatory sa kanya yung gagamitin yung full IFRS. If there are subsidiaries na kasama itong related parties, dapat lahat mag-full IFRS. Why? Kasi they will be preparing a consolidated financial statement. So, hindi pwede na magkaiba-iba sila ng standard na mag-consolidate, no? So, yun po yung sinasabi natin dito na accounting standards. So, accounting standards between the related party transactions and the independent transactions. So, among the aspect of consistency of accounting standards that need to be noted is uniformity in classification of expenses. Ito yung chart of accounts natin. So, paano ba tayo nag-classify ng expenses? Ako, palagi kong ina-advise na pag gumawa tayo ng chart of accounts natin and then we classify our expenses, sundan natin yung classification ng BIR. Paano ba yung mga classification ng expenses ng BIR? Nasa ITR po yan, nasa 1701, nasa 1702. What are the expenses classified by the BIR? Ito yung salaries and wages, ito yung repairs and maintenance, taxes and licenses, no? Depreciation, utilities. So, sundan na lang natin yun. Huwag na tayong gumawa pa ng kung ano-anong chart of accounts, no? Kasi mahirapan na tayo pag nag-cluster tayo ulit pagdating ng filing ng income tax return. No? No significant added value to the product, no? So, the method will be more appropriate to use if the reseller does not add any significant value to the product that are sold. So, kung yung reseller, sabi ko na sa inyo, binenta na lang niya kaagad yung binili niya na goods, hindi na siya nag-process ulit, ginawan pa ng ibang packaging o nilagyan pa ng ibang pangalan, no? So, walang significant na added value to the product. Hindi niya inalter, hindi niya binago yung product. Okay. Intangible assets that may be generated. No? If a distributor performs extensive marketing activities, for example, creation of distribution channel or very high promotion advertising expenses, no? Lalo na pagka nag-uumpisa pa lang, malaki talaga advertising, especially kung nagpapakilala pa lang sa market, no? It can be said that the distributor may have become the economic owner of intangible assets, no? So, economic ownership in connection with the extensive materially influence the gross margin. No? The purpose of increasing comparability is to eliminate the material influence on the gross margin para ma-eliminate at magiging similar sila, no? Kasi yun ang purpose ng arm's length. No? Comparability can be increased by making reasonably accurate adjustment using multiple year data, aggregating transactions, and using manual search and selection criteria. So, yun yung pwedeng gawin. If it is difficult to make reasonably accurate adjustment, the revenue officer need to consider using another transfer pricing method that is more appropriate to the facts and conditions. Kasi ang comparability, mahirap gawin ito kung kulang ka sa information or data. No? Okay. Example. Taxpayer TMD, a distributor, is a Philippine subsidiary of multinational WSR, which is located overseas. WSR distributes high-quality product manufactured by WSR. WSR also sells similar product of a lower quality to an independent distributor, FEL, in the Philippines. No? Okay. The cost of the product purchased from WSR by TMD is 760 per unit. No? TMD resells the product to independent party for 8 pesos. No? So, 760, binenta niya ng 8 pesos. Meron siyang 40 cents. No? A functional analysis shows that TMD and FEL perform similar function. The gross profit ratio of FEL was found to be 10%. No? 10% yung gross profit niya. Ibig sabihin, doon sa 10% na yon, kukuhanan pa doon ng mga operating expenses. No? So, mababa yan. Pagka yan lang yung profit ratio mo na 10%. Okay. So, example, WSR manufacturer, no? Si TMD distributor reseller, and then nagbenta siya sa independent party. No? Manufacturer WSR sold to FEL independent distributor or reseller at arm's length price yung goods, and then binenta naman ni FEL sa independent party. Okay. So in this example, it is noted that there are product quality differences when comparing the controlled and uncontrolled transactions. However, since the focus of comparison is on margins, the differences are not as material as they would have been if the basis of the comparison were on the prices. So, kahit, di ba, sabi kanina, yung binenta sa Philippines sa FEL is low quality, no? Pero, hindi na siya ma-consider kasi hindi material po yung difference. Why? Kasi gross profit ang kino-compare, hindi naman yung net income or yung price, no? Okay. So, TMD and FEL carry out similar functions. FEL being another reseller in the same market. Thus, the resale price margin of 10% will be used as basis to determine the arm's length price for the original purchase by TMD from WSR. No? So, magkano ba talaga? Arm's length price of product purchased, 8 pesos minus 8 times 10%. No? So, 8 times 10% is 0.8. No? So, i-minus mo yan sa 8. Kaya ang matira is 720. No? So, arm's length price of the product, 720. Okay, another example. Philco distributes laptop computers in the Philippines for its overseas parent company. No? PICO Company C, a Philippine company unrelated to PICO, has also been appointed by PICO to distribute desktop computers in the Philippines. No? So, ano yung isa? Nag-distribute ng desktop computers. Yung isa naman, laptop computers. No? Okay. So, in this example, it is assumed that the laptop and desktop markets are similar in the Philippines. So, the main difference between the two distributorship agreement is that Philco performs promotional and marketing functions for PICO, whereas Company C does not. No? Okay. Ang difference lang nila, promotional and marketing. But if you try to look at it, major po na functions itong major na expense itong promotional and marketing, especially if bago pa lang yung product, no? Okay. So, manufacturing PICO, no? Benta siya sa company si distributor niya, the gross margin is 10%. No? And then binenta sa customers. And then si PICO naman, nagbenta sa Philco distributor, sa customer, same lang, no? 10% also. 10%. Okay. How will you compute now the arm's length price for the related party transactions? Philco sales of laptop to unrelated parties, 3,500. No? So, unrelated parties, meaning yan yung hindi controlled. Less arm's length resale price margin based on company's transactions. No? 10% multiplied by 3,500 is 350, no? So, sales 3,500 less arm's length resale price margin based on company's transactions 350. So 3,500 less 350 equals 3,150. Less adjustment for marketing cost na 80. So transfer price based on resale price method is 3,070. So adjusted na po tong 3,070 na price, no? The above example is based on an internal comparable P equals transaction with company C, an independent party, is used to benchmark the transaction with Philco, a related party. Kasi hindi po tayo pwedeng kumuha ng comparable na hindi independent or related party also. No? Dapat independent. The same analysis could be undertaken using external comparable. Benchmarking the related party transaction between PICO and Philco against comparable transactions between an independent manufacturer and the distributor. Kasi yun ang functions nila eh. Manufacturing and distribution. Okay. So, kailan tayo mag-a-adjust if there is material differences after our analysis. And then, let's now go to the third transfer pricing method, no? We have the cost plus method or the CPM. Wala pang question? Shout out.
Wala naman, sila pa rin yung huling chat, sila pa rin.
Okay. So, sige. So, dito na tayo sa cost plus method or the CPM, no? Mamaya siguro mga 9:45 doon tayo magdi-discuss doon sa tax update, no? Okay. Let's now go to the cost plus method or the CPM, no? CPM focuses on the gross markup obtained by supplier who transfers property or provides services to a related purchaser, no? So essentially, the method attempts to value the functions performed by the supplier of the property or services. CPM is most useful where semi-finished goods are sold between associated enterprises or where the controlled transactions involve the provision of services. So, kailan maganda na i-apply yung CPM or the cost plus method? Pagka nag-sale ka ng services or yung product na binili mo needs or required further processing, no? Kaya nga semi-finish lang. Ibig sabihin may gagawin ka pa. So may mga cost ka pa na i-apply or gagamitin. So this method is often useful in cases involving the manufacture, assembly, or other production of goods that are sold to related parties or where controlled transactions involves the provision of intra-group services, no? Ano ibig sabihin ng intra-group services? Within the group, no? So, starting point in CPM is the cost incurred by the supplier of property or services in a controlled transactions, no? So, for property transferred or services provided to a related purchaser. Okay. An appropriate markup is added to this cost to find the price that the supplier should be charging the buyer. So the cost plus method is a transfer pricing method that adds the gross profit from comparable independent transactions to the cost borne in related party transactions. No? In my experience, ang karamihan talaga na gumagamit ng cost plus method, itong mga BPOs natin, itong business process outsourcing natin. Why? Kasi services lang yung pinoprovide nila. No? They're not selling any goods. Okay. Application of the cost plus method to transaction of sales of goods or services is done using the following steps. Okay, letter A, perform comparability analysis. Kaya nga sabi ko sa inyo, kahit anong klaseng method, apply pa rin the 5 comparability factors. Kaya, Letter A, perform comparability analysis, no? The cost plus method attention must be given to the comparability factors between related party transactions and independent party transactions, no? So, number one, characteristic of goods and services. So, always talaga yung characteristic of goods and services, no? So, differences in the characteristic of goods and services generally do not have a material influence on the gross markup. Kasi nga, sabi ko sa inyo kanina, the characteristics influence the price. Pero pagdating na sa gross profit margin, hindi na masyado. Okay. So, example, company manufacturing toasters and a company manufacturing irons have comparable FAR. Ano yung FAR? Functions, assets, and risk. So, these two manufacturing companies should have comparable levels of gross markup. Oh? Comparison of the toaster manufacturer and the iron manufacturer is done on the assumption that there is no reliable toaster manufacturer. Although differences in goods or services can be tolerated, the comparability of the characteristics of goods and services between the related party transactions and the independent transactions still requires attention. No? So, excessive differences in the characteristic of goods and services tend to indicate the existence of differences in FAR that have a material influence on the markup. No? Pagka daw excessive na yung differences sa characteristics ng goods and services, meron na talagang difference in FAR. No? Functions, assets, and risk. Okay. So, FAR analysis, cost plus method, comparability of FAR between related party transactions and independent transaction is emphasized more than comparability of the characteristic of goods and services. Kasi nga, sabi natin yung characteristic influence the price. So, doon siya material yung kanyang effect. No? Sa cost plus naman, yung FAR, yung functions, assets, and risk. No? So, related party transactions and independent transactions can be considered non-comparable if there are significant differences in FAR. No? Significant differences in risk reflect differences in the expected return. Yes. Kasi sabi nga natin, high risk, high reward. So, kung nasa iyo yung risk, dapat mataas talaga yung bayad sa iyo. Example 17, no? Ito na yung example natin. After performing FAR analysis when engaging in transactions with its parent company that owns intangible assets, TMD Corp functions as a manufacturer with limited functions and risk, no? So, limited risk na manufacturer siya. Siguro yung raw materials hindi kanya, no? So, contract manufacturing that does not bear market risk, no? So, wala siyang market risk. Bakit? Lahat ng product na magawa niya, kinukuha lang ng parent company, no? Si parent company nagbebenta. While when engaging in transactions with unrelated parties, TMD Corp functions as a fully fledged manufacturer that bears market risk. Kung ikaw yung fully fledged na manufacturer, pati market nasa iyo. Kasi full-fledged ka pati marketing, apektado ka. No? So, there are differences in FAR, unexpected return, between affiliated transactions and the independent transactions have material influence on the gross markup. No? Ano ba yung markup? Ito yung sa gross profit. No? Okay. So, in this scenario, independent transaction of TMD Corporation cannot be used as internal comparable because of the material differences in its functions and risk. So, ito na yung pag naghanap ka ng comparables mo, pag malaki yung diferensya, hindi mo na siya talaga gagamitin na comparables. Consistency of accounting standards, no? So, sa cost plus method, nandyan pa rin yan. Excuse me. Yes. Okay. So, consistency of accounting standards. No? So, yun yung in-explain ko na sa inyo kanina, yung ano ba yung accounting standards, no? At saka dapat consistent tayo when it comes to adoption of these accounting standards. Kasi merong accounting standards talaga na pinapagamit sa atin. And when it comes to taxation, we follow the accounting standards. Saan ba ginagamit itong accounting standards? In the evaluation and measurement of the assets, no? Okay. So, when testing related party transactions using the cost-plus method, the revenue officers need to confirm the comparability of the cost basis, no? So, magkano ba yung cost? Kaya nga tinawag ito na cost-plus method, no? Okay. So, with regard to the cost base, consistency of cost structure is an important aspect, no? Bakit siya important aspect ang cost? Kasi yun yung may direct na may material effect on the gross profit. Why? Kasi sales, less cost of sales equals gross profit. So, yung cost talaga, may material effect siya sa gross profit, no? So, there may be differences in accounting treatment between countries and even between companies in the same country, no? Kaya nga sinabi ko na sa inyo kanina na pagka sa accounting standards, di ba ngayon may requirement na tayo worldwide na we have to adapt the IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards. Why? Kasi pag iba-iba yung accounting standards natin and then the business has multinational enterprises has significant presence or meron silang business presence worldwide. So definitely kung nasaan man yung kanilang business, gagawa yun ng report, no? So pagka magkakaiba ang accounting standards na ginagamit, ang dami mong adjustment na gagamitin. Why? Because one account will mean a different account dun sa mga subsidiaries na i-reconcile mo, o i-consolidate mo. Kaya, isang accounting standards lang po ang pinapa-adapt sa atin ngayon worldwide, which is the IFRS or the International Financial Reporting Standards. No? At ano pa yung importante na sinabi ko sa inyo kanina? Di ba meron tayong iba-ibang accounting standards. Full IFRS, the IFRS for SME, and then IFRS for small entity. Pero ano sabi natin kanina? If your parent company is such that full IFRS siya, dapat yung mga subsidiaries niya, full IFRS na rin para pareho sila ng report. Hindi mahirapan pagdating sa consolidation of reports. No? Okay. So, other comparability factors. Differences in contractual terms, business strategy, economic conditions, also important comparability factors in applying the cost-plus method. No? So, revenue officers compare the gross markup of related party transactions and the gross markup of independent transactions after performing comparability analysis. No? So, yun po yung gagawin ng examiner. No? Compare the gross markup ng related transactions and the gross markup ng independent transactions. Okay. There are two ways to compare gross markup, no? Direct comparison. If the comparability analysis does not find difference in conditions between the related party transactions and the independent transactions that materially influence the gross markup, the reasonable price can be determined from the difference in gross markup, and adjustment can be made on the difference between the reasonable selling price and the selling price from related parties. No? Kaya ang tawag sa kanya direct comparison. No? So, dinirect mo lang na compare din yung reasonable selling price and the selling price from related parties. Why? Kasi pag binawas mo na doon na yung cost, then you will get now the gross profit margin. Indirect comparison used when based on the comparability analysis, there are differences in the conditions between related party transactions and the independent transactions. So, may difference na condition that materially influence the gross markup, and reasonably accurate adjustments are made to eliminate this material influence in order to obtain the reasonable selling price. So increasing comparability on the cost plus method is done by making reasonably accurate adjustment using multiple year data, aggregating transactions, and using manual search and selection criteria. No? So, halos bawat method, ginagamit din natin ito. Kung mapapansin ninyo kanina dun sa CAP method, comparable uncontrolled price, at saka dito sa resale price, at saka ngayon dito sa cost plus, the same pa rin, no? Multiple year data, aggregating transactions using manual search and selection criteria. Okay. So, letter B, we have increasing comparability. How do we increase comparability? When there are differences in the conditions between related party transactions and independent transactions that materially influence the gross markup, no? So, yan ang tinitingnan. Bakit? Kasi ano lang ba yung nag-i-influence sa gross profit margin? The direct cost. The purpose of increasing comparability is to eliminate this material influence on the gross markup. No? Kaya nga ina-analyze na Kasi kung malaki talaga yung material, yung effect niya sa gross markup, then titingnan na siya as a sort of comparability analysis, no? Okay. So we have discussed to you the first three methods. We have the comparable uncontrolled price method, we have the cost plus method, and the resale price method. Oh? Ngayon pupunta na tayo sa third, no? Sa pang-apat na transactional net margin method. Actually, pang-apat na to kasi nakatatlo na tayo kanina. The comparable uncontrolled price method, the resale price method, the cost plus method. Pang-apat na itong transactional net margin method. No? Wala pa rin question?
Ma'am, shoutout ko lang po si Sir Eugene Cruz. Nag-send po siya ng super chat. Thank you po. Ng word 250, ma'am. Nag-send siya ng super chat. Thank you po.
Okay. So, TNMM operates in a manner similar to the cost plus and resale price method in the sense that it uses the margin approach, no? Ano tong TNMM? Ito yung transactional net margin method. Pag sinabi natin na net margin, ano ibig sabihin? Net income, no? Ito na yung sales, less cost of sales, equals gross profit, less operating expenses. It equals the net margin. So, pagdating na sa transactional net margin method, ang kino-compare dito is the net margin, is the net income. No? So, tanggalin mo na lahat, the direct cost, and then the operating expenses. So, you arrive at the net margin. Dito ka na magko-compare. The method examines the net profit margin relative to an appropriate base, such as cost, sales, or assets attained by the member of a group of controlled taxpayers from a controlled transaction. Okay. So the primary difference between TNMM and RPM or CPM is that the former focuses on the net margin instead of the gross margin of a transaction. So one of the weaknesses of using the net margin as the basis for comparison is that it can be influenced by many factors that either do not have an effect or have a less substantial or direct effect on price or gross margin. No? So, yun ang weaknesses ng net margin. Kasi sa dami na, no? Bago mo ma-arrive yung net margin, ang dami mo na mga cost, lahat ng cost, consider mo na. Kaya, minsan, ang sabi dito, yun yung weakness niya na hindi naman dapat maka-affect. Pero, na binawas pa rin. Kaya, hindi na siya reflected talaga dun sa mga factors that affect the net margin for purposes of comparing the net margin between related parties and the independent parties. So, example of such factors include the efficiency of plant and machinery used, management and personnel capabilities, competitive position, and others. No? So, unless reliable and accurate adjustment can be made to account for these differences, TNMM may not produce reliable measures of the arm's length net margin. No? So, kung wala daw adjustment na gagawin, sometimes hindi siya reliable measure ng arm's length net margin. Kaya kailangan talaga may adjustment. So, yun ang gagawin ng examiner, mag-adjust. Why? Because yung adjustment, yun yung source mo ng deficiency. So, yun talaga ang hinahanap ng examiner. Okay. TNMM is usually appropriate to use when the gross profit of the business is not easy to determine, such that either CPM in case of a manufacturer or service provider or RPM in case of distributor cannot be used. No? Since the net margin figure is always available, TNMM may be used instead, applying the same formula as those for CPM for manufacturer or service provider or RPM for distributor, but rather using net margin in lieu of the gross margin or profit. Sino yung gumagamit kanina ng gross margin or gross profit? The resale price method and the cost plus method. Si TNMM naman, ang ginagamit niya, net margin. No? Transactional net margin is a transfer pricing method that uses the indicator of profit level in comparable independent transactions to determine the net operating profit of related party transactions. So, ano na ang hinahanap dito? The net operating profit. Kasi yun na yung kino-compare. No? So, application of the transactional net margin method in transaction of purchase or sale of tangible goods and services are done. No? Ito yung mga steps. Letter A, select the profit level indicator or PLI that is most appropriate to the facts and conditions. No? So, the PLI is shown in the form of a ratio between net operating profit and sales, total cost, assets, and others. No? Determination of the denominator used in the TNMM is done by considering the company's profit drivers and their independence from the denominator that is used. No? So, ano ba yung profit drivers? So, doon na tayo babalik sa intangibles. Bakit? Ano ba ang intangibles? Intangibles are profit drivers. So, TNMM is influenced by intangibles. Kaya pagka makita mo sa analysis mo, may intangibles used na, definitely hindi mo na pwede gamitin yung cost plus method, the CAP method, the resale price method. Doon ka na kaagad sa profit split or sa TNMM. No? Kasi, ang sabi dito, i-consider mo na yung profit drivers ng company. No? Ano ba yung profit drivers ng company? Yung sabi natin, intangibles. Ano ba yung mga intangibles? No? Can be, intangibles can be, halimbawa, siya lang yung meron yan sa market. No? Very unique yung product niya. Those are intangibles. Or siya lang yung may secret formula. No? Siya lang yung may ganyang klase na product. No? So, unique yung product niya. Those are profit drivers. Okay. Other factors that need to be considered in selecting PLI are the type of business and the availability of data. Kasi minsan, pwedeng gamitin mo yung resale price, pero hindi available yung gross profit. So, doon ka na ngayon sa available yung data mo. Halimbawa, ang data available mo is the net margin. No? So, service provider companies, manufacturers, and the like use net operating profit compared with total cost as the PLI. So, in contrast, distribution activities generally use net operating profit compared with sales. No? Sino yung mga distribution activities? Ito yung mga yung mga distributor, yung mga bumibili lang, halimbawa, dinidesignate lang sila ng parent company nila na sila yung mag-distribute ng product for the parent company who is a manufacturer. So the ratios generally used as PLI are net margin, net markup, and return on assets or the ROA. No? So we have the ratio of level of return on sales or net margin. Paano natin yan kinukompute? The net margin is calculated using the following formula. Net margin equals net operating profit times 100% over sales. No? So yun ang net margin. Ito yung net income natin, no? Net operating profit na tinatawag. Sa atin karamihan yan, net taxable income, no? Okay. Number 2 is the ratio of level of return on total cost, net markup, no? So how do we compute the ratio? Net markup is calculated using the following formula. Net markup equals net operating profit times 100% over cost of goods sold plus operating cost. No? So, yun yung net markup. Okay. Next, the ratio of return on assets or the ROA. Ano yung return on assets? Kasi sa dami ng assets mo, magkano na lang yung return yan. No? ROA is calculated using the following formula. ROA, net operating profit times 100% over total operating assets, no? Kasi kung minsan, bakit napakalaki ng assets mo na hindi naman kailangan ng business mo? Yun pala, yung assets na yun, pinapagamit niya sa ibang subsidiary, pero sa kanya nakapangalan, no? Bakit? Kasi siya yung may maraming expenses, siya yung magkiklaim ng depreciation. When in fact, yung operating assets na yan, pinapagamit niya lang sa ibang subsidiary. No? Ito yung actual, nandiyan pa si Miss Marie Grace. No? Nandiyan pa siya? Okay. Ito yung sabi mo na actual na case. No? May actual ako na case dito sa ROA, sa return on assets. No? Yung na-review ko na transfer pricing case, ang question ko sa kanya, manufacturing ang functions niya na registered, no? So, manufacturing company siya. When I try to look at the financial statements, walang raw materials, no? Ang ano lang niya is the direct labor and the factory overhead. Yun lang yung expenses na kiniklaim niya. Sabi ko, bakit wala kang raw materials? Kasi sabi niya, the raw materials is owned by the parent company. And that same parent company, siya yung one and only supplier and one and only buyer of the product of the subsidiary. When I try to look at naman sa assets, wala siyang machineries and equipments. Pero anong ginagawa niya? Garments, yung nananahi ng mga garments, no? So sabi ko, paano mo ginagawa naman yung garments mo na wala ka namang machineries and equipments? No? Alam mo ano naman ang explanations? The machineries and equipments are also owned by the parent company. No? So anong conclusion in that case? You are not a manufacturing company. You are just performing service to your parent company. No? So, yun po yung typical na case. That is an actual case. Typical na case ng transfer pricing. No? Kasi, wala siyang machineries. Wala din siyang raw materials. So, paano ka naging manufacturer? No? So, dito makita mo, dito sa ratio of the return on assets, subsidiary ka, bakit wala kang assets na dapat, since services ka, manufacturing companies ka, paano ka makapag-manufacture ng products kung wala kang machineries and equipments? No? So, a manufacturing company is asset-intensive. No? May asset talaga yan. If you're a manufacturing company, you really have to invest some money on the machineries and equipments kasi gagamitin mo yun. Eh, bakit siya wala? No? So, makikita mo ngayon, kung sa balance sheet naman ng parent company niya, bakit ang dami niyang assets, ang dami niyang machineries and equipments na hindi naman siya manufacturing company? Sinong gumagamit nun? And then, nagkiklaim siya ng depreciation na napakalaki. No? So, yan ang questionin mo ngayon, the ratio of return on assets. Bakit napakalaki ng assets mo? Hindi mo naman kailangan. Okay. So, total operating assets include operating fixed assets, including land, buildings, plant, and equipment. No? So, yun ang operating assets. Bakit tinatawag siya na operating assets? Because you are using those assets in your operation. No? Especially, there are industries na asset-oriented. No? Manufacturing companies are asset-oriented. Kasi hindi ka makapag-manufacture ng product without the machineries. No? So, intangible assets used in the business such as patent or know-how, no, yan pa. So, aside from, sa totoong buhay, if you are engaged in manufacturing company, yung tangible mo na investment on the assets, isa lang yun. Mayroon ka pang intangibles. Why? Because you have patents, you have know-how, you have logo, you have trademark, you have copyrights or whatever, no? Ang dami mo pang intangibles if you are a manufacturing company. Okay. And working capital assets such as inventory and trade receivables less trade payables. No? Kasi pag manufacturing ka, dami mong inventories. 3 yung inventory mo. Ano yun? Your raw materials, your goods in process, and your finished goods. No? Investment and cash are not included in operating assets unless the company operates in the financial service industry. Siyempre, kung financial services industry ka, yung operating assets mo, cash. Bakit? Kasi yun ang pinapautang mo. Yun ang nagdadala ng kita sa'yo. No? So, operating assets mo siya. Pero kung manufacturing ka or any line of business, other kind of business, hindi mo operating assets ang cash. Increase comparability. Increasing comparability in the TNMM includes manual search and selection criteria. No? So when the comparable companies used are external comparables, the search for comparables can be done using publicly available data such as commercial databases. But remember, napakamahal nitong commercial databases, may bayad yan. No? Okay, searching using a commercial database can be done through a search using certain specific criteria, a searching strategy, such as industry code in accordance with the taxpayer being audited, region, availability of data, and financial statement indicators. No? After conducting a data search using a particular searching strategy, data on one or more companies will be obtained that can be used as comparables. Kasi in this case, ang pinag-usapan na natin dito, yung ginagawa ng examiner. So even the examiner would also be using comparables kasi gagawa siya ng sarili niyang analysis. No? So it's not enough na meron kang ginawa na transfer pricing analysis mo. The examiner should also do ng sarili nilang transfer pricing analysis. No? So, the data obtained from commercial database are only candidate comparables. No? So, hindi pa sila talaga. Why? Kasi mayroon ka pang ibang i-reject dyan. Eh. No? Mag-search ka pa lang. The candidate comparable that have been selected must then undergo a process of manual review, manual screening, so that it can be decided whether the candidate comparables are used, reliable, or rejected. No? Okay. Ang BIR gumawa siya ng sarili niyang benchmark per industry during the time of Assistant Commissioner Valeroso. So, when I do the transfer pricing analysis, ginagamit ko pa rin yun. Although it pertains to another period, taxable period. But since yun yung pinaka-latest, wala nang gumawang iba, nagagamit pa rin po. Per industry po yun. So manual screening can be done by studying the profiles of the companies that are candidate comparables, looking at their websites, no? Seeking information about the candidate comparables from print or media online or other methods. No? Manual screening can be done quantitatively and qualitatively. No? So ano yung quantitative? Quantity, amount. Qualitative. Kung maganda ba siya? Okay ba siya? No? Use of multiple year data. No? Wala pang question? Multiple year data are used when they can improve the results of the comparability analysis. Tapusin lang natin tong multiple year data, no? Can improve the process of screening of candidate comparables. For example, by identifying comparables with significant differences from the tested party. No? So, in certain cases, this can lead to rejection of anomalies in candidate comparables. No? The use of multiple year data in comparability analysis does not mean that the determination of the fair price or profit use the average performance of multiple year data. Minsan kasi may mga information na makukuha mo dun sa multiple year data na nakakatulong dun sa transfer pricing analysis mo. No? Okay. So, per transaction or combined transaction approach. No? Testing of related party transactions can be done per transaction or by combining transactions, considering the facts and conditions. Testing of combined related party transaction is more appropriate, for example, when the transactions are closely linked or continuous. No? Example of application of testing of combined transactions. No? Transaction, ito yung i-combine mo na yung transactions, hindi yung per specific. Although yung sa akin, nung gumawa ako ng transfer pricing analysis, ginagawa ko na kaagad by segment, no? Halimbawa, 4 yung commercial activity nung ng taxpayer. 4 na analysis na ginagawa ko kasi magkakaiba yan ng comparables eh. So A, transactions arising from a long-term contract for supply of commodities or services. No? Letter B, use of intangible property intrinsic in a product. Intrinsic kasama na sa product. Determination of prices of closely linked products. Or the company applies a pricing strategy focused on a portfolio approach by minimizing the profit from certain products in order to maximize the profit or other related products. For example, the pricing of printers and of cartridges. Cartridge, ito yung ink, di ba? No? Cartridges. So, magkasama yan. Printers and cartridges. No? Combination na yan. Although, iba yung benta ng printers, iba din yung pagbebenta ng cartridge. Parang sa, computer na hardware at saka yung software. Magkaiba din yun. No? Yun yung nagiging issues dyan kasi bibilhin mo yung software tapos iba pa yung nagbibenta ng software, bibilhin mo rin yun. No? In some cases, yung both companies, ginawa nila yan na dalawang company din ang nagbibenta. When in fact, pwedeng isa lang kasi same product lang yan eh. Hiniwalay nila. No? Isang company, related party, nagbibenta ng hardware. Isang company, na related company din, nagbibenta ng software. No? Pero, they belong to the same company. Yun yung sinasabi natin na combined transactions. Okay. So, number 5 na tayo, profit split. 9 o'clock na, di ba? So, yung ating tax update. Ating tax update sa oras din yun, no? Antok na sila. No? So, shout out na lang tayo sa ating mga
Nakatutok pa rin ngayon. Wala nag-chat-chat eh, pero may viewers pa rin.
Sige, meron pa? Tapusin na lang natin yung profit split, no? Profit split method. Okay. So, the profit split method is a transfer pricing method that split the combined profit. Ibig sabihin, yung profit ng buong grupo ini-split between the group, no? Mga subsidiary, parents, holding companies, ini-split nila yon between the related parties involved in related party transactions based on the contributions they make. Kasi sa integrated na operations, may mga participations yun, may mga contributions bawat isa. No? So the profit split method is used in cases involving highly integrated operations or where both parties make a unique and highly valuable contribution. For example, contribution of unique, valuable, intangible property so that the testing cannot be done separately. So, since highly integrated nga, hindi mo siya ma-value isa-isa, no? Example, kasi actual case ko rin to na-examine ko. Yung dito sa Pilipinas, nag-hire sila ng mga engineers, no? Engineers, architects, ang dami. But when I examine, ilang taon na sila, puro net loss, puro net loss. Bakit net loss ito? Yung daming mga engineers, mga architects. No? Anong ginawa? Meron silang parent company in France doing construction in the Middle East. No? So anong ginawa ng France? In-outsource niya dito sa Pilipinas yung lahat ng kanyang mga plano, mga yung paggawa ng mga spec doon sa kanyang kontrata na that requires na mga engineers, mga architects ang gagawa. So, anong ginawa niya? In-outsource niya dito sa Pilipinas. Magkano lang niya sinesweldohan yung kanyang mga architects dito, kanyang mga engineers at a very low price kasi ang standard na pagbabayad dito sa Pilipinas, no? And then anong ginawa niya? Cost plus lang. Cost plus method. The cost, reimbursement of cost dito sa Pilipinas plus markup of yung iba 3% lang, yung iba 5%, yung iba 7%, no? So, ang laki ng tipid niya. Why? Kasi kung doon niya ipapagawa yun sa France, sobrang mahal at sobrang laki. So, anong ginawa niya? Nag-hire siya ng maraming engineers, maraming siyang architects to make all the specs at saka yung mga plano dito sa Pilipinas. So, ang laki ng tipid niya. And then, ina-apply yun doon sa kontrata niya sa Middle East. So, anong nangyayari sa France? Ano lang? Ang parang office lang, ng head office lang sa France. Pero doon lahat nagre-remit ng profit, doon lahat nagre-remit ng sales, no? Pero kung tutuusin mo, opisina lang siya doon sa France kasi ang project site niya, ang construction niya, nasa Middle East, no? And then, yung mga group of persons niya na mga architects na mga may know-how talaga sa construction, nandito sa Pilipinas. So, sino yung nandoon sa Saudi na lang na gumagawa? Yun na lang mga foreman, mga nandoon na ang plano, sundan na lang nila yung plano. Ano naman ang ginagawa ng France? No? Ang sarap ng buhay ng France. Nandoon yung income lahat sa kanila. Sino yung mga nandoon? Yung mga stockholders lang, yung mga may-ari, yung mga investors ang nandoon. So, how much yung kita nila in a span of 5 years na tumataas sila up to more than 600%, no? Ganun ka dami yung kanyang ganun kadami yung kanyang kinita. And then, so ito yung pinag-usapan natin na profit split. Oh? Kasi i-split natin yung kanyang kita. Kung sino yung nag-contribute dun sa project. No? So, profit split method seeks to eliminate the effect on profits of special conditions made or imposed in a controlled transaction or in controlled transactions that are appropriate to aggregate by determining the division of profits or losses that independent enterprises would have expected to realize from engaging in the transaction or transactions. Okay. So, two profit split methods are commonly used. Ano yun? Yung contribution profit split method and the residual profit split method. No? So, just in the title na lang, no, contribution. So, based on your contribution, i-split yung profit. Ano naman itong residual profit split method? Kung sino yung may malaki talaga na contribution, kunin muna yung participation niya dun sa profit. Yung sobra, yun na lang yung split, no? Sa mga contributors. Okay. So, contribution profit split method, we have the contribution profit split method applied when transactions occur between parties that are closely integrated. No? This method is also known as one-stage analysis. Kaya nga, contribution. Halimbawa, yung net margin ninyo is 30%. Split nyo na lang using kung ano man variable na pag-usapan ninyo. Split nyo na lang directly with the participants. No? The steps in applying the contribution profit split method include the following. Number 1, combine the net operating profit of the parties as a single unit. So, yung example ko, dito sa Pilipinas, doon sa France, doon sa Middle East, combine nila lahat yung profit na yon, and then split na nila based on their participation. No? So, determine the FAR that contribute to the net operating profit. Ano yung FAR? Functions, Assets, and Risk. And then, identify the external data. Siyempre, may cost of money yan na ginamit, yung contribution ng investor sa France. No? So, kasama yun sa variable na to determine the share in the profit. So, before performing the weighing of the functions, the revenue officers can perform analysis of external market data. For example, from joint ventures that reflects how independent parties allocate profit in comparable conditions. No? Since construction yan, so siguro magkaroon ka ng construction companies, no? How they split their profit. If no data are available, the revenue officers may use internal data, no, including financial data, to perform the weighing. Analysis of contribution is done based on a detailed analysis of whether the FAR that are used in allocating profit are economically acceptable or justified. No? Kasi kung walang available na data, wala kang compare, ito yung mga instances na transfer pricing will still applied kahit walang comparables. Ito yung profit split, no? And justified pa rin na split nyo lang yung profit. Kasi sometimes the industry is very unique, so walang comparables. Perform weighing of functions and determine percentage shares of profit. Kasi ano ba yung variable mo? Siyempre, functions. Doon mo i-allocate yung profit. Yun yung basis mo to divide the profit. No? So, the weighing is based on the relative values of the functions performed and the economic contributions of each of the affiliated parties in the transactions. The relative values of the functions performed may be associated with cost, expanded, assets used, and others. No? Ito yung example ko dito kasi meron ako na audit na outsourcing din siya. No? Dito siya sa Pilipinas with 2,500 employees. No? And then yung kanyang mga participants to the to the operations nila nasa US, yung iba kung saan bansa, no? Pero ang pinakamarami niya talaga na employees dito sa Pilipinas, no? So I tried to apply the profit split based on the variable, ano yung ginamit ko, the number of employees. So nag-object yung taxpayer kasi sabi niya kahit sa US konti lang yung empleyado but sila yung nasa management, no? So hindi ko natapos yung case na yun, no? Allocate profit in accordance with the weight or of the contribution of its affiliated party, no? After obtaining the percentage of profit, next perform a calculation of the allocation of the profit to each of the related parties in the transaction based on the weight of their contributions. So, dapat talaga kung ano yung kinontribute nila, to be fair, no? Hindi yung dictated lang pati ang pagbigay ng profit. Biro mo, Pilipinas, puro net loss. Walang binabayaran na income tax kasi net loss. Bakit? Kasi reimbursement lang of expenses, walang income. When in fact, since integrated yung business, dapat may split or may share ang Pilipinas dun sa profit earned by France. Biro mo, lahat ng profit na sa France, as much as 600%, no? Ang na-earn niya na profit, samantalang yung iba puro net loss. Siya lang yung kumikita. Number 6, determine arm's length profit. The positive correction to net operating profit is attributed to the affiliated transactions that occurred, such as purchase transactions. No? Okay. Ito namang residual profit split method, tapusin na lang natin, no? O wala nang tao.
Meron po.
Natutulog na.
Pakikinig lang talaga sila po.
Okay. So, the RPSM is applied in cases where both parties in the transactions have unique and highly valuable contributions. For example, contribution of unique, valuable, intangible property. No? Okay, so the steps in applying the residual profit split method include the following. Number 1, combine the net operating profit of the related parties as a single unit. No? And then determine the contribution of each party. Based on the FAR analysis, it is known that TMD Corp has manufacturing intangible in the form of patent, while TMDI has marketing intangibles. No? So, yun ang dalawa sila. Ang isa, may manufacturing intangibles. Yung isa, may marketing intangibles. No? So, identify routine functions, simple functions without the contribution of its party. TMD Corporations has routine manufacturing functions, while TMDI has routine functions as distributor. No? Seek comparables for the routine functions without the unique contribution. Okay. So, tanggalin mo muna yung unique contributions nila. Based on the routine functions performed by its party, it is possible to determine comparables for these routine functions. The routine function of TMD is manufacturing. So the revenue officers need to seek comparable companies that routinely engage in manufacturing. No? For PT, TMDI, the revenue officers need to seek comparable companies that function routinely as distributors. So, siyempre, distributor siya, ang comparable mo dyan, distributor din. No? Kasi you cannot compare ng magkaibang functions. Calculate the share of profit for each party without the unique contributions. So, after obtaining external comparables for the routine function of each party, the next step is to allocate the profit based on routine compensation using the one-sided method. Okay. Determine the relative values of the unique contribution of each party. And then the residual profit, that is the remaining profit, after step 5 is attributed to the affiliated parties based on the relative values of the unique contributions made by each party. So, ang ibig sabihin, buo pa yung profit, determine mo muna kung magkano talaga yung dapat mapunta sa isa based on the functions performed. Ang matira doon, yun ang i-split nila. No? Okay. Okay, so, basis in determining values of unique contributions. External market benchmark that reflects the fair market value of intangible property. And then capitalized cost for development, repair, and renovation of tangible property less the appropriate amount of amortization based on the useful life of its intangible property or the actual amount of cost of development of intangible property in the most recent years. So, if this expense is constant during that period and the useful life of the intangible property of the parties involved does not differ too greatly. No? So, actual amount. So, allocate now the residual profit based on the relative values of the unique contribution of its party. No? Kasi residual, yung natira na lang na profit. Kasi tinanggal mo na yung profit na para talaga doon sa contributors. No? So after obtaining the relative value of the unique contribution of each party, the next step is to allocate the residual profit based on the relative values of the unique contribution of each party. Determine arm's length profit from the result of the calculation up to step 7 above. No? Okay. So, this is another topic na. Okay. So, yun po yung ating discussion ngayon. We finished the transfer pricing method. So, ano yung mga methods that we have discussed? We have the comparable uncontrolled price method. We have the resale price method, the cost plus method, transactional net margin method, and we have the profit split method. No? Siguro yung next time yun namang business restructuring po yung i-discuss natin. No? So, hindi na natin i-discuss yung ano kasi bitil na eh. Yung RR21-2020, no? Magiging bitin lang tayo. At saka ano na, yung marami na discussions, full na. Wala ng battery? Meron pa. Okay. So, hopefully, we have delivered to you yung discussions po natin about transfer pricing methods. No? So, thank you very much. And hopefully, we can continue bringing to you all the updates, especially in taxation. The purpose of our channel is for you to have a better tax compliance. Thank you and good evening.